Everett, but it's fine. I've been called far worse.
Same, to be honest. Kind of like offered to do an art department talk. So if you have any questions, just put them in the chat and we'll answer them like at the end of this presentation. So I'm just going to hand you over to James, and when more people come, I'm just going to allow him to join. So yeah, James, what's up?
Cool. Hello. So yeah, I'm just going to begin by kind of running through a bit about me, my background, how I got here, and then after that, we're then going to run through just some broad kind of tips and tricks, like a bit of a broad process for a bit of like a step-by-step guide for kind of how to approach kind of your situation and how to approach kind of getting into either the art department, set dec, or props, or indeed potentially another department as well. So we're going to go through that, and then afterwards, just to finish, we're just going to go through some sort of free flow Q&A really. So any questions you've got, there'll then be a chance to kind of ask those then, based on anything I've said or any question you had beforehand. So yeah, so those sorts of three stages really. So I hope that all makes sense. So yeah, I'll just sort of get started really. So basically, this is all the way I like to describe this is it's a bit of a roadmap to finding a job in either the art department, set decoration, or props departments, and ideally avoiding a quarter life crisis along the way. Ideally, it's surprising how many times I mention quarter life crisis, and a lot of people can just immediately identify what I mean, which is so you might find you've already started having one, but but that's fine. So the reason I say that is because that's kind of exactly what happened for me really. So with that in mind, I'll just kind of run through a bit about me and my background, which you might find a bit reassuring in a way, because basically I came from knowing pretty much nothing, and then eventually managed to kind of find my feet really. I don't mean that in a glorified sense, but I say that because if you already know something about film and TV, whether you've done a degree in it or you've worked in a different department or any of the above, if you already know something about it, then you're already starting in a far better place than I was. So that just will hopefully feel a bit reassuring to know, to then with a view to sort of getting to where you want to be basically. So I'll tell you a bit more about me. I originally started off doing a mechanical engineering degree, and here's me looking a bit wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. And during the degree, I kind of fairly early on realised that I would like a more creative outlet for the engineer. I like the problem-solving aspect of it and the sort of the creative thinking aspects of it, but I kind of knew early on that I wanted to do a bit of a more creative / unconventional outlet for that, rather than sitting in an office designing engines basically. I wasn't quite sure how to go about doing that or what form that could take, but to try and explore a bit more and try and answer that question for myself, we basically had a chance for doing what's called a sandwich year, which is a kind of year-long work experience placement at a company that we kind of organised ourselves basically. So there was a chance to do all sorts of different types of work experience really. So I ended up finding a placement at a design company, and at the time it kind of felt like a bit of the short straw, but I later came to realise it was a bit of a blessing in disguise, and that's because literally just down the road from the company there was a privately owned Tudor manor house, basically like a sort of stately home, that looks a bit like this. And I didn't realise it at the time, but this would, by discovering this place, it would be quite pivotal in kind of changing the course of life basically, because it's privately owned, they do a lot of historical recreation events where a lot of volunteers and people, they do a lot of sort of they basically recreate historical periods as accurately and immersively and atmospherically as possible, really. So to give you an example of what those kind of look like. So you've probably either seen or been to events where you go to a stately home and they've got people dressed up in silly clothes, and they're sort of recreating various moments in the past, really. And to do this, you're researching a setting and a theme and a place, and you're then putting together your own costume, props, etc., and doing all these sort of different things to recreate these worlds and settings, really. And I didn't realize this at the time, but it would later turn out to be kind of an ideal sort of little apprenticeship for working in film and TV, basically. So I did a year in Suffolk where I was also taking part in these events. I then went back to uni, finished that, graduated, and then literally still a bit unsure what I wanted to do with life. The week after I graduated, literally, through people I'd met at the Tudor Manor House here, I got a job as an extra for a few days on a BBC documentary about the Tudors. And so we got to go to the nice, pretty part of North Wales where tourists often pay a lot of money to go. And we went to this nice stately home and got to sort of wear the Tudor costumes we already had as part of these events. We got to do that for a few days, and this is my first interaction with film and TV. And I thought, this film and TV malarkey is quite nice, isn't it? And I then wondered, how the hell does it all work? Because I then kind of realised this could potentially be the sort of the more creative outlet for the engineering kind of skills that I'd been looking for, really. So then, knowing nothing about film and TV at that point, I just thought I'll try and explore it a bit more, find out how it works and how I can get involved, basically. And this is the kind of the start of a period I now refer to as a quarter life crisis. And again, I didn't realize it at the time, but turns out this is a period that a lot of people go through for one reason or another. So yeah, I tried to explore how to get into film and TV. So as part of that, I did various different things. So I was an extra on a few more different productions, sort of like Vanity Fair, World on Fire, The Crown, a few different other ones. This is from World on Fire as well.
James,
yes.
Yes, yeah, your presentation's not showing up.
What, not at all? Or?
Not at all, no.
Oh, has it not been from the get-go, or?
It was, and then it's not. I think you've stopped sharing your screen by accident, pal.
Have I? Let me go on.
There we go.
Shall I backtrack a bit? So yeah, this is the title sequence about the Tudors. So as I said, yeah, I was an extra on a few different productions like Vanity Fair, World on Fire, and The Crown and things. So this is from Vanity Fair. This is from World on Fire. And then, as well as that, so I quite early on realised I would quite like to work in the art department in some way, or I didn't realise what that term meant at the time, but I realised I'd like to do something relating to like the sets and the props, for example. So then I simultaneously kind of explored ways of doing that as well. This is another show I was an extra in. So as part of the other sort of art department related things I explored, so I did a bit of like sort of junior set building, junior prop making. So this is from a kind of Narnia recreation that we made for it's like a secret cinema type thing. It wasn't literally secret cinema, but that sort of gist. I also worked with a sort of prop and model making company where we helped to build this, which is a it's a gaming board for an exhibition that was they held in Spain. So they made this board in London and they shipped it over to Spain for an exhibition, for example. So yeah, bit of prop making and model making like that. And then more importantly, I then later on started doing a few different courses with a few different people that were, quite a few years ahead of me. And that's the point where I kind of started finding my feet and sort of getting a gist on it, or getting a gist of things. And then that's when I, shortly after doing courses like that, that's when I kind of found my feet and then sort of started working on productions regularly more after that, really. So with that in mind, I then started doing a few more sort of lower budget stuff things. So this is a shot from the Souvenir Part 2, which is a film we did in Norfolk, actually, but is apparently on Barack Obama's list of top 10 films he would take to a desert island, apparently. Make of that what you will. And then more recently, this is some of the things I've worked on in a few different capacities. So I did a little bit of dressing props and set dressing on Bridgerton, and then Winter King, for example, I was doing sort of weapons, horse tack, and action props and things like that. Did a bit of set dressing on, like dressing props on Fast and Furious, and then things like the Power and Gallows Pole, I was doing action props. And Hannah was doing action props. So that's a bit of a snapshot of some of the things I've done in a few different capacities, really. So I don't know if anyone's got any questions about that so far. Jay, I can't really see the screen, so feel free to read out any questions that do appear. But if not, I can then just carry on to the next part, whichever you.
We've got no questions about the presentation stuck on this from World on Fire slide.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's on any questions for me?
There's no questions for you at the minute. It's just we can see your cursor moving quite a bit.
Because on my screen it says any questions.
Oh, on ours it's just a picture of you next to the Spitfire.
Oh right.
Oh, now it is. Now it's changed.
Oh right. So hang on. If
I do apologize for any technical issues, but we'll send out this in a PDF as well afterwards to everyone.
So can you see any questions now?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I don't.
Cool. I'll carry on then if there's no questions about any of that. So next section. The way I think this will be sort of particularly useful because a lot of people will often say, "Oh, I want to get started in working in the art department." Well, a lot of the time they'll either say, "I either want to work in some form of props and set design role," or they might say, "I want to work in the art department or set deck or props or prop making or any of the above," and they'll often kind of jump straight to wanting to sort of look for work, thinking that if they just look for work and they'll be able to sort of find an appropriate job. And to some extent, if you did that, you might find a job just by, if you throw enough mud at the wall, eventually some of it will stick. But equally, you wouldn't book a driving test without obviously booking some driving lessons first and doing a lot of prep work beforehand. Therefore, to immediately sort of try a jump to looking for work, that can be a little bit like booking a driving test without having booked any lessons beforehand. Because if you immediately start trying to look for work without having a proper understanding of how the departments work, or which department you'd like to work in, or indeed which job role you'd like to work in within each of those departments, if you haven't got quite a decent understanding of that, and if you don't fully understand what the job entails and what skills you kind of need for each job and whether you've got those skills or not, without having a sort of without having had all those things in place, you're pretty unlikely to pass your driving tests / succeed in getting a job in one of those departments, really. So the gist is, it is important to do a lot of groundwork first, basically, because otherwise you might just be on a hiding to nothing, really. So don't just immediately try and jump to looking for work, because it's unlikely to succeed, really. So with that in mind, I'm just going to go through the sort of the groundwork that I recommend doing, just to really improve your chances of finding work, but also improve your understanding of how productions are made, which job roles you'd like to do, and in doing so, then find a job that you are interested in and that you like doing, and will lead to, further work in the future that you will also enjoy doing. Hope that all makes sense so far. So I'm just going to run through these 7 steps, which will kind of do all that really. So firstly, and the first 3 steps I kind of broadly group together to sort of say it's about finding out which department and which job role is ideal for you, basically. So that's what the first 3 steps do. So step 1 is understanding the different departments and the different job roles within each department, really. And so, as I said before, sometimes people will just say, I'd like to do something involved in props or set design. And my response is normally, do you realize that set design isn't actually a thing? That set design isn't a department and it's not a job title. It's more of an activity, but that's a bit of an umbrella term that incorporates many different departments and many different job roles, really. So it's really important to understand which department and which job role you'd like to work in, just so that then you know what to aim for. Because obviously, if you don't know what to aim for, it's pretty tricky to achieve it. which I don't think is controversial. So yeah, step 1 is understanding the different departments and the different job roles, such that you can then identify which one you'd like to do. So once you've done that, we then move on to step 2, and that is understanding yourself and the way you like to work, and the kind of the lifestyle you like to lead, and that's kind of the first step. That's a big step for identifying which job role and which department would be ideal for you, basically. Because you might like the sound of a particular job in theory. For example, you might like the sound of drawing sets, but you might not like the idea of sitting at a desk or sitting at a computer for 10 hours a day doing that. You might decide, for example, I do like drawing sets, but I would prefer to be in a workshop or out and about or working on set, for example. So various sort of things like that. So understanding how you like to work is then really important. And so if you understand what the different job roles entail, and then you understand how you like to work and what appeals to you, if you understand both of those things, that then leads me on to step 3, which is then, by linking those 2 aspects together, you'll then be able to identify a job role, or perhaps a few different job roles, that you like the sound of and that kind of are suited to the way you like to work, basically. So the way I kind of like to particularly look at this is that if you can do this literally or just mentally, but if you write down a list of considerations when looking for a job, the way you can sort of do that is if you kind of prioritize the ones that are important to you. So, for example, the main thing for you might be, I'd like to be working in a workshop or doing things by hand, for example, and kind of prioritizing those in order that are sort of useful to you. And then sorry, 2 seconds. So yeah, by kind of prioritizing the aspects that are important to you, so you might decide that working in a workshop is the most important thing to you, by sort of prioritizing the different aspects, and then that will then help you match up the different job roles and what they entail with the way you like to work and what you like doing, really. That will then help you identify which job role you'd like to do, and then you'll have a good idea of which things to aim for, really. So as I said, so steps 1 to 3 are basically about identifying which job role you'd like to do, and then thereby knowing what to aim for. So once you know what job role you would like to do, then we come to the next step, which is step 4. So you might have some of the skills already to do that job role, or you might not. Now, either way, it's important to sort of identify which skills you need to do those jobs in theory. Now, you haven't got to be like a master at it or an expert in it, but it's good to have as many skills as possible, because basically just to stand you in better stead for getting work, basically. So the more of those skills that you need for each job role, the more those you can acquire, and the better standard you can get those job roles, the better, basically. And that'll help you stand in better stead for getting work. And a way of also improving that is by then, if you identify any skills you haven't got, you can then look at potentially sort of different courses that will teach you those. So, for example, you might have good digital drafting skills, but you might be a bit poor in, for example, making white card models or hand drafting, or things like that. So therefore, for example, you might want to do a short art department course, maybe like one of London Film School, for example. And so that will then help you identify skills you haven't got and ways of improving those, such that by doing that, ideally you've then got a lot of the skills you need to do those job roles to as good a standard as possible, really. By doing that, that means you're then not effectively booking a driving test without having had any driving lessons beforehand. And you can then, all these sort of skills and experience, you can document in a portfolio if it's relevant. There's some job roles you don't particularly need a portfolio for, but sometimes it's useful to have one. So you can potentially document that in a portfolio, and then once you've got that and ideally a CV together, if that can document the relevant skills experience as well, that'd be great. So once you've then got a CV and potentially a portfolio together, you can then move on to the next step, which is step 5, which is then basically looking for work, really. Sorry, step 6. So then that's starting to look for work, because you've then got in a position where you've identified the job roles you'd like to do, you've ideally got those skills, and then you might as well then start looking for work and seeing if anyone is looking to fill a role in that department, really. So there's various different ways of doing that. Clue, Mandy is not one of them. And LinkedIn gets battered around as a bit of a way of doing that. And I mean, universities often use LinkedIn as a way of looking for work, but really, personally, I would not put that as top of my list for looking for work in sort of the art department, or any of the job departments, any of the departments we've looked at. There are lots of different things I would put far higher on my list, really, before even thinking about using LinkedIn. There's various different ways of looking for work, really. Predominantly, it's about contacting the right people in the right way, knowing where to find their contact details, and then to some extent just sort of knowing what to say, and just knowing what to say, knowing how to approach the situation, and then knowing how to follow up, etc. Really, in a way, it's not. In a way, anyone can do it. You haven't got to be a master networker or like a super confident public speaker or anything. But there are kind of certain aspects of it that people find a bit nerve-wracking and daunting and intimidating. But it does get a lot easier. It's a skill like any other. The more you do it, the more you practice it, the better at it you become, basically. And in doing so, you do develop a lot more confidence, which will then also stand you in better stead for both working on the job generally and solving and addressing a lot of the problems you encounter on the job, but also just it also just gives you a lot more confidence for kind of approaching other people in life generally, really. And you know, anyone who's sort of been looking for work over the last few years, or you know, anyone who sort of regularly reaches out to people to look for work, you know, it is quite obvious when how their confidence levels increases over time, really. So if you reach out to sort of various different people and start looking for work like that, ideally over a long enough time horizon, and by reaching out to enough people, you'll then be able to find something. And then so finally, once you've found a job, this leads on to step 7, which is basically then preparing for your first job, really. So that could then include various, like on a more mundane level, just making sure you've got all the relevant kit to do the necessary things involved in that job. So that might be anything from making sure you've got a decent laptop and things like, for example, an online bank account, having all the sort of necessary things like that. It might also be things like potentially ensuring you've got business insurance on your car, making sure your car has been serviced recently, just so it's not likely to, just so you're not likely to have any car trouble halfway through the job. It could also potentially be a case of finding accommodation close to where you'd be working. So you might find a job away from where you're normally based, and in which case you might find you need to find accommodation close to that job, really. So there's various different ways of doing that, but that might be another little hurdle that you find yourself having to do. Alternatively, a production might even provide you with accommodation. It depends on the job, depends where it is, etc. really. So basic various bits of things like that regarding preparing your kit, just so you've got all the relevant things from day one that you will need to do your job, really. I'm also quite a big fan of having lots of little survival kits in your car, anything from sort of jump leads and a pump, like tire pump, for example, things like that, all sorts of things, because you know you never know when you're going to end up in a field, or you know, it's you're often doing things that HR would describe as a dynamic, fast-paced work environment, which basically translates to you're often doing all sorts of things that might grab you by surprise, and you might, you know, often not know what you're doing 1 hour from the next. So it's just really useful being prepared for all manner of eventualities, and just having lots of useful kit in your car as well, basically. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but that's generally how I would kind of approach the situation, such you're not joining the ranks of a lot of people who say, I would like to do something relating to props and set design, but don't know what that entails or what to aim for. And as a result, they just end up continuing a quarter-life crisis and not knowing how best to sort of fix their situation, basically, if that makes sense. So as a lot of it, to some extent, you know, in a sense, it's not difficult. You could say that it's more about perseverance than anything else, because you know, like anything else, if you've got a bit of a strategy and approach for knowing how to address these things, it just makes it a hell of a lot easier, really. And this is the sort of thing that, you know, if you wanted to be an accountant or a doctor or a teacher or anything like that, you know, a lot of the sort of career advice like this would be easily available, but it's often not quite so easily available for things like film and TV. And that's also the case on some of the degree courses as well, because, you know, I've lost track of the number of people I've spoken to who have done a degree in some sort of film and TV related subject, but they just found that they haven't they've finished, but then they've not had enough information to then hit the ground running and be able to, you know, find their first job soon out, really. They've often had a lot of problems as a result, and this is particularly the case for people who want to work in the art department as well, because often art department or art department related departments often aren't covered on the degree so much. So yeah, it's just mad how little how little knowledge is kind of readily available for how to work in film and TV, and particularly for people who want to work in the art department, really. So I hope that all kind of makes sense and gives you a bit of a better outline for how to approach things. There's a lot more to it than that to some extent, but that we'd be here for days, if not weeks. But with that in mind, does anyone have any questions so far? That could be either about anything I've said or any questions you had to begin with.
Seems to be no questions so far.
Cool.
How necessary do you think going to university is for getting into the film industry? That's from Luke Bowley.
Personally, well, to begin with, let me start by saying I don't think I've ever really spoken to someone who has done a film and TV related degree and have then also said that it was worth the time, money, and effort spent on it. And that personally and anecdotally, that kind of applies generally to all manner of departments, but particularly for anything relating to the art department. Basically, I don't think I've spoken to anyone in any area of film and TV who said that. It's useful, don't get me wrong, but I would just personally view it as a case of whether it's worth the amount of time, money, and effort spent on it. Because it's not a short amount of time, it's not a small amount of money, etc., and it's a lot of effort. And particularly if you want to find if you want to do anything relating to props, set design, art department related things, there are specific degrees you can do that cover it in a bit more detail. But so certainly if you did a bit more of a generic film and TV production degree, a lot of times the art department and anything relating to that doesn't get as much attention as it kind of deserves, really. Departments like directing, sound, editing, what have you, they tend to get prioritized more over art department. And also, even on the art department specific degrees, they're a lot more useful. But I've still met a lot of people who've said they've still found a lot of things missed out. It kind of depends which one you do at which university. But I've still, as I said, I've still met a lot of people who've found they've missed a lot of things out. I mean, like for example, as a person I worked with a few years ago, and she did do a production design specific degree, but they didn't really explain that set decoration was a thing, and she only found that out after graduating, which is ironic because she now works in set decoration. So it's so they are useful, but as I said, I would personally and anecdotally, they don't seem to be worth the time, money, and effort spent on them. Really, if it was purely a case of picking courses that would get you there as soon as possible, there are lots of different sort of short courses I would much more readily recommend, really, because you will spend less on them and they'll be a hell of a lot shorter, or a hell of a lot less than 3 years. And really, I just see that they're a lot more relevant and related to the industry, basically. The only other aspect, of course, is the sort of the uni lifestyle and like the student lifestyle, which you might want, you might not. I'm not sure. But again, like to what extent that makes the whole process worth it is another matter. But yeah, and also, I mean, like personally, I found the whole uni lifestyle a bit of a myth anyway, because you see the glossy brochures, or you see people out getting pissed every night. But you know, actually, if you're doing a degree that is of any worth and benefit, then actually it's a hell of a lot of work, and actually you haven't got the time or the brain space or whatever to be out getting pissed every night. So to what extent that's worth, you know, that's worth it. But does that make sense so far? Any further questions or thoughts about that? Actually, do you want me to stop sharing my screen because then I can then see the actually no, I'll cool. You should be able to see me again. Yeah. Cool. But yeah, does that make sense? Any further questions about that? Okay. In terms of short courses, what would you recommend? Various ones. It depends. Basically, it depends on what you want to do, like which department you want to work in, which job role you want to do. Depends on what different skills you've got already and what ones you think you're lacking. Depends how long you want to spend on a course, and how good at it you want to get, really. So it kind of depends. It's easier, to be honest, to kind of ask you about a bit more about your situation, and what you'd like to do and what you wouldn't like to do, for example. I'll post a link to this at the end as well, but just for the meantime, if you're on Facebook, a better way of doing that, I've got a Facebook group. I'll just put a link there. Feel free to send me a message, and then we can just have a little chat about your current situation, and then I'll be in a better position to kind of advise some of the short courses, really, if that makes sense. Just because it's a bit of a broad topic, and it's one that sort of depends from person to person, really. Does that make sense? Or cool noise. Any other questions? And also, if it helps, just for the points of discussion, what are the main things you're all kind of struggling with at the moment? Like, what stages are you at, and what are you particularly having difficulty with at the moment? If you mention those in the comments, for example, we can then look at those a little bit, if that's easier as well. So, any other questions from anyone else? Or so, from someone I know who is an art department runner, they've got into the art department via their cousin, but I guess this can apply to all. How to make those connections with people in the department, like HODs for art, where they mostly hang out. So, there's a few different ways you can do it, really. Personally, I recommend the method I always go to first. I recommend phoning them. You can email them, but I always recommend phoning them first. that I've always found that to be the most effective, really, and I still do that. This applies also generally in life. It's like if you can have a much more proper conversation with someone, you're much more likely to actually make a human connection with them, which is then, it means you're much more likely to then have something come out of it, basically. So I'd recommend phoning them in the first instance. There are a few different, there's a couple of sort of job platforms. Filmbase is a good one. There's a few different ones like that. There's some that are particularly used by the art department, so you can also look at things like British Film Designers Guild, for example. So yeah, those two are particularly good. Don't use things like Mandy or any of the weird ones like that. I've never known anything to come out of them, basically. There's a couple of art department related Facebook groups as well, so they can be sort of useful as well. But personally, the one I always go to is just phoning them, and just keeping a log of the conversations you have, who you phone, and just go through it like that, really, if that makes sense. Right, how to go about finding these people's numbers. Best way to answer that properly, I've got a little document I can send you. So what I recommend doing, again, if you drop me a message on Facebook, I can send you a guide about doing that, because that's a bit of a, in order to answer it properly, that's a bit of a longer question to ask, really, and I'd rather answer it properly and give you like a proper guide about it, rather than just sort of doing it a bit half-heartedly or improperly, really. So yeah, feel free to, if you go on the link above to join the Facebook group, just drop me a message, then I'll send you a guide, if that makes sense. Laura says, hi James, I'm currently struggling with building on my experience and a bit with networking. I already completed some traineeships in both art department and in props. I just can't seem to find a way to find more opportunities / step up to other junior positions. I also find it a bit hard to follow up with people once I message them, as I didn't want to come across as annoying, although I know it's a bit of a silly thought. Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. So are you either interested in art department roles or props or both, or are you a bit uncertain to begin with? If we just iron that out first, because as I said, it's important to know what to aim for. So yeah, Laura, which department are you predominantly interested in, if indeed you know? Okay. So therefore, is props a bit of a side interest? Am I right in thinking, or? In fact, Laura, can I unmute you?
Yes, hello. Sorry, I know it
That's cool.
would be
This is
really
easy. So
long
yeah,
to just write down. Sorry. So yeah, I'm mainly interested in art props. I really enjoy props for the making aspect, because I quite like using my hands. And to be honest, it is just, I find it sometimes a bit easier to find, for example, dailies opportunities, in props, because there just seems to be more of them.
That's how I kind of got into set decorating. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I know it is a bit weird as well, because I'm up in Scotland. Opportunities might be a bit,
jealous.
less. And obviously it's competitive down south as well. But here as well, it's just like a bit less opportunities. A lot of people still want to get in, and yeah.
So have you got a CV and a portfolio and things like together like that, or?
Yeah, I have my CV completed. My portfolio is basically I'm just updating it or trying to update it like as I go.
Hmm. So presumably you send those out to people as you reach out to them, do you?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. How do you go about reaching out to people?
Honestly, usually emailing. So I do have like the film bank directory, which we use quite a bit up here in Scotland. And basically,
Yeah.
it's just I usually try to find the details of people there, or if someone I've worked with, I usually try to message them both in email and, sometimes, people I'm more comfortable with, basically, or had a closer working relationship with. I do message them sometimes, in text message, but it's just, I
I
don't know.
wouldn't text them.
Hmm.
That's a bit. One, they generally don't like it, and two, it is a bit. To be fair, it is a bit. What's the word? Is it? You're better off just if you can do anything, just email them. But have
Hmm.
you tried phoning them or?
No, 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 no.
I'd immediately reach to that basically in the first instance.
Oh, okay.
But don't do it on weekends.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Do you know what to say with things like that? Has someone explained the process to you? Do you know kind of what to do and how to do that, or?
I more or less think so. Or again, it's just like sending out the first message, I think. In general, I don't find a problem with that. It's when, like, for example, people don't get to me, for a while, I feel, I don't know, a bit annoying or embarrassed just trying to follow up somehow, maybe.
Yeah, that's normal, but it is quite a common thing. Often you won't hear back from people unless they've actually got anything. So
Yeah.
if you don't hear anything, that's not to say you've pissed them off. That's just they have nothing particularly relevant to say, or they're busy, or what have you. It's not really a reflection on you personally. If you want, as I say, feel free to go on the Facebook group. Just send me a message, and I'll drop you a guide about how to sort of ring people.
Lovely, thank you.
Which will kind of cover things in a bit more detail than kind of what I can give here, basically. So, also for fear of boring other people, but.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
But no, so there can be a fine line between being persistent and being a pain, but you kind of have got to just be to some extent. Being an irritation is sort of what can get you places, but in a not be persistent in a way that will make them remember you or think of you, but don't piss people off, because that's just not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's not going to be good for anyone. But but if you understand the nuances, or if you understand the fine line, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, let's drop us a message and I'll send you a document thing.
Lovely, thank you so much.
That's right, no worries. Cool. Any other questions? I guess after that, feel free to just say if you'd rather just speak rather than typing it out, which might be easier. We'll give people a bit of time to type something.
You're more than welcome to unmute yourselves and ask questions as well.
What's that, sorry?
So everyone's more, they find themselves to be more useful to unmute and ask questions that when they can.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for giving your time to us, James.
No worries. So about all the tech problems earlier. Don't know what.
Yeah, you always have issues with tech somewhere along the lines.
I don't know what caused that. It was working fine before, but
I'll get the PDF of your presentation as well,
Yeah.
or the presentation I've converted to a PDF, and
Yeah.
I'll send it to everyone, and everyone will be getting it off our no reply set status email, which is you should check your spam folders for that, along with a link to this recording. And yeah, so if you've got any questions, just ask them, and I'm sure we've got another 5 minutes before we're due to leave.
I say if you think of anything else afterwards, then just feel free to drop me a message on Facebook, really. And
Yeah,
it's not a last chance saloon.
definitely not a last chance. This will I also get, like, at times I do get department questions a lot from the Facebook groups. I know a lot of people might be from the Facebook groups that me and Jackie run. Not Facebook groups, the WhatsApp groups. And it's quite handy to have someone who knows that department, how to get into that department, rather than telling them, oh, just go in as a location marshal and bug the crap out of the department you want when you can.
Yeah.
It does work. I've got a few location assistants into the camera department or AD department for doing that, but again, they have to spend their time working in the location department as the job, rather than just, oh, I'm here, I can go do this now. You have to do the actual job before you get recommended by your head of department. The same with work.
Or being a props driver or something like that. It's just sometimes people think that by giving their CV to the security guard on a set, they think by giving their CV to a security guard at the beginning of a set that they'll somehow, potentially get them a job, and it's like
it does work sometimes. It's not a full method, because a lot of security guards will hand any documentations to the location team or the unit manager, and that just goes into a box and never sees the light of day again, because we're busy ourselves doing our jobs.
Yeah. And also the security guards often don't know who does what or who to give things to, so they just the likelihood of it ending up with the relevant person is a bit remote, shall we say. But the other thing you can do, though, is working as a SA or an extra, because this is hardly something that will occur all the time. But one time it was on World on Fire. I got chatting to the supervising art director, and this is when I was an SA on World on Fire. And I said, I'd like to do art department stuff. And then he gave me like several days work experience off the back of it, which was really kind and really fun and interesting. But, so if you just are a bit audacious / ignorant enough to just talk to people like that, then sometimes it can lead to places. But, it's hardly not a guaranteed thing as such, but. Cool. Should we leave it there, or?
We should leave it there. So if anyone else, if you think of a question and you think, oh, bugger, just, if you got my number, just drop me a message. I'll pass it on to James. And I'll put James's email and all his links to his courses and his Facebook group into the after email, along with everything else. So thank you very much for attending. You also receive a link for a survey to see how helpful you found this out, because more information Set Starters has, is the more how we can find other people to help and how we can build this community more, so we can best bit of us help us to help you, in a sense. So thank you for attending.